Jagatreya, I prefer gender pronouns, going as PM, no POI preferences. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, and 1. I think let me just start off by giving you some simple frameworks of how insurance policies as a whole works, right? I think typically when you have like these insurance policies like that come into play, people most likely opt into it or buy into it when they're like in their 35s, like to 40 age region, right? This means that they don't have like that much intrinsic knowledge about what kind of schemes that they're necessarily opting into. They don't have that much like experience as to what particular models and policies will fit them best. And it's also most likely that these insurance companies being like, a little bit scummy and like meaning like, because they're so profit hungry and like, profit incentivized, they're more likely to go ahead and like push certain policies that might, make them more money than you, right? They might go ahead and say, oh, look, I'm going to push this certain policy to you that will maybe benefit you when you die, but if you don't like go ahead and renew this particular model at this particular time and you try to like, go ahead and return this policy or surrender this policy, and you're not going to get like any sort of money as a whole, right? I'm going to go ahead and like explain the second piece of it. Understand that like in this aging population, in like a country where it's dominated by like these older people, there's a lot of burden on the government, right? Why do I say this? Because they're very reliant on like pensions or welfare schemes that the government goes ahead and pushes. They're not like very employed. They don't have any sort of jobs. They don't have any sort of income to rely on in the first place, right? This means that they're overly reliant on what the government already gives them, meaning that like, this is why I like comparative as a whole comes into play in the first place, right? I think it's simple to understand, right? When you have these model insurance policies, the way they work is you have a particular set date as to when your policy expires. Maybe my policy expires in the year 2038, and if I don't go ahead and die before that particular time, I can't necessarily surrender it because I'm not going to get any sort of money in the first place. But on top of that, it's going to get more and more expensive to actually buy these policies or renew these policies again, right? Why do I say this? It's because when you go ahead and grow older, it's much more like it's much more in like the favor of the eye of the insurance companies as a whole to say that because you're more at risk of dying, you're going to go ahead and like you'll have to pay more money in the first place, right? This is how insurance policy companies work in the first place. So opposition as a whole can't come and tell me like these insurance companies are going to be like the best possible actors, because at the end of the day, they're profit hungry companies that will go ahead and fuck you over in order for them to gain some sort of profit at the end of the day, right? Now let's go ahead and like tell you what this policy essentially looks like. I think it's simple, right? When you go ahead and say that, oh, look, when you can necessarily like give your insurance policies or sell your insurance policies to like other companies or other people that will go ahead and buy it. Yes, we do bite the bullet that it might be marginally lesser than what you get when you die out, but it's still okay, right? Because look at it on scale. I think it's simple to understand. It's only when you die that you get these benefits, and that's also not going to be very guaranteed because these insurance companies can go ahead and find some sort of way to maybe like turn this over and like not give you the full amount in the first place, right? Because there's such bad actors in the first place, right? This means that when you go ahead and like gain some sort of money from like these other companies or these other actors, they're necessarily going to be better actors in the first place, right? They're going to go ahead and give you like some sort of money. They're going to go ahead and give you some sort of liquid cash, which is what these older generations is necessarily missing, right? They might have like assets or they might have like land or anything, but they don't have like any sort of liquid cash present. They don't have any sort of like mobilization present at that particular moment, right? They're going to like be overly reliant on like governmental schemes as a whole. Now pushing our constructives as to what can they do better now with this like money that they're going to get from these particular actors, right? It's simple. One is firstly they get like a lot of financial freedom, right? As I told you, they're already so over reliant, and now when they have some sort of cash at hand, it's so simple now for them to like go ahead and like seek remedies. And it's so easy for them to go ahead and like pay like certain mortgages or pay like their kids' student debts, or like they can use this money for like some collective good at like at an earlier time rather than wait like for a longer time, right? When they die out as a whole, and it's not very guaranteed that they're going to get like the full amount in the first place. So I think the comparative is like in their paradigm, in opposition's paradigm, where you like might get some sort of money, or you might not get scammed by a company, whereas our comparative is like plain and simple. It's that these older people do get some sort of cash at hand. It might be marginally lesser, but they still go ahead and get like a set required amount that they can use to like fulfill their life, right? I think then what our second constructive becomes is that there's going to be lesser burden on the
clarification.
Right? It's simple. Now in my framing itself, I told you that in these particular countries, in these particular nations, it's very, very stringent on the government. It's very, very hard taxing on the government because they have such a huge population now to cater to, with like pensions, with welfare. Like they have to pour out so much money to these particular older generations, right? I think then it becomes simple. when they don't have that much burden on them, that much that much of a welfare or that much of a pension, it becomes simpler for them to reallocate these funds into going ahead and doing something better, right? Meaning this can go ahead and be them developing better infrastructures for the younger population, so that they don't necessarily go ahead and leave this country, leaving it to be an older generation. So the country itself will do so much better now because they don't have that much financial burden on them to cater to such a huge population that needs them for some sort of sustenance, right? Or some sort of survival as a whole. This means now that the government on our paradigm is also going to be much better. They're most likely going to utilize these funds into doing collective good for the society in the means of developing better infrastructure, developing better education centers as a whole. It's going to be much easier for the older generation in particular because now they have easy mobilization access. They have some sort of liquidity, right? This means that they can use this money for good. They can pay off mortgages. They can go ahead and pay off student loans. They can go ahead and pay off other loans that they would have had that would normally compound with interest as they go ahead and die. This means that it's quicker and easier for them to pay off loans without having to suffer or let their family suffer much later on with these particular debts that they've incurred. And I think it's very simple that these insurance policies are not going to be necessarily the best factors. Yeah.
How many people on life insurance are dead reliant on welfare? How massive is this money shift even in the first place?
I think it's quite simple, right? If you have majority old people in a particular nation and they're going to be very, very reliant on the government as a whole because they don't have any means of employment, they don't have any means of other income. This means that their only source of income is going to be the government, providing them with welfare, providing them with pensions. They're still going to be reliant on this particular sector, right? And I think it's, coming back to why we take this over any other house, it's quite simple. Insurance companies aren't the best possible actors. They're going to find a way to fuck you over. They're going to find a way to push out policies that make them the most amount of money or make them the most amount of profit. So your interests are not going to be at heart. So I think it's very simple for these older people to go ahead and sell it to these particular other actors where they can get some sort of money, where they can get some sort of mobilization. It's better for the country as a whole. It's better for these individuals as a whole. And it's also better for their families as a whole because now they don't have that much debt to go ahead and rely on, right? I think with all of those reasons, it's clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We and as a majority. Strategy here is going to be really simple, right? There is no need to actively prop up this business. Actively propping it up does more harm than good. I'm not saying that the business is inherently bad because it's still going to exist for our world and you still get those benefits, especially for the desperate last caste stakeholder that they're referring to. However, two immediate rebuttals. One, the desperate last caste stakeholder is far lower than number than they're actually claiming. But two, this propping up actively by the government does far more harm than good to the industry as a whole and everybody else that wants to make life insurance claims. Essential, simple strategy. Therefore, does more harm. Quick couple of rebuttals and then I'll do my capitalization. One, old people, aging population means you're reliant on the government. Absolutely fucking not. That's a huge leap of logic. Let's look at empirically right now who are the ones suffering from reverse demographic aging. There's countries like Japan, certain Eastern European nations or Nordic countries. Nordic countries, highest quality of life indicators in the world, most per capita income in the world. Japan, fairly solid in this metric. I'm not sure if we want to place this debate into the context of highly aging populations because theoretically speaking, every country in the world has aging populations. Either way, this claim is categorically untrue. Because you're old, you're reliant on welfare. No, because there are plenty of other laws that exist in terms of securing your pension and welfare. You working through any significantly organized sector means that you have, most countries in the world have laws to protect you in terms of guaranteed pensions, savings that you need to, that is taken out of your salary empirically true across the board. This link, highly untrue. But even if it were to be true, it is uncertain as to why the government reliance stops. The government reliance has nothing to do with this debate simply because whether or not they get this payout sooner rather than later, the government reliance is still going to be independent. The money that the government is going to spend on these people does not change. Does this improve their quality of life in the short term? Uncertain, simply because there are significantly other alternatives in terms of their own personal savings, their own things. They've already mentioned why these individuals will have assets, but as to why they have liquid assets, that is still something most people plan for with antecedent knowledge. You know going in that I'm going to have to live to a certain extent. You plan to have savings and buffer because you know what, I don't know when I'm going to die, but regardless of whenever I die, if I die sooner and I have money saved, this is going to be the nest egg that I give to my children. At which point none of this behavior is changing. Their claim, which is reliant on people who are aging, just don't have liquidity and are reliant on government on both fronts falls. Very quickly then, critical actual analysis in terms of characterization as to what this looks like. Three important things. One, insurance companies for the most part are the biggest assholes in the world. They're extremely predatory. They have multiple reasons to deny claims to people. Why this makes it worse? Uniquely, that means that if you bust out or you lapse a payment or you're not able to claim an insurance, that's actually floor level prices. That means they give you pennies on the dollar. If you have 1 million payout, they will give you under 100,000 if that's what your payment out looks like. That means them saying you get more than the bare minimum if you are going to lapse actually doesn't mean much at all. If you are getting, instead of 60 grand, you're getting 100 grand and you were supposed to get $1 million down the line, that's not saying much at all. Because the floor is really that low. Multiple reasons why the floor is that low. Insurance companies extremely predatory, extremely large, extremely pervasive. Additionally, they also have extreme lobbying structures that work within corporations and the government structures and regulatory captures, which means this inherently mitigates a large chunk of the benefits that they get anyway. Second, what do these institutional investors that you could sell your life insurance actually look like? They are essentially buying liabilities. They are buying for a potential future gain. They are giving you money right now. Second, they are also doing it for a long and uncertain payoff. You don't know when the person who you buy it off is going to pop off. But also, it is likely going to be a large chunk, which means it's not quarter to quarter, at which point you can have predictions or have cash flow income that you can predict as a large scale company. Rather, it is going to be 5, 10, 15 or possibly on a spectrum you don't know, which means you can't plan, which means only certain kind of companies can get into this business in the first place. What are essential features with all of these restrictions? What is the kind of company that gets in? It's extremely large companies with a lot of capital. Because if you don't have these two things, you cannot survive in this business for the reasons that I've mentioned. Which means because of the uncertainty and the high capital requirements and the long-term payout, your business will not survive or will inherently be uncompetitive if you cannot go ahead and engage unless you have the features of being A, extremely large, B, having a lot of capital. Being large and having this capital, I'll give you the same analysis that comes from the insurance agencies. Any actively co-opting, and this is the clarification we wanted to ask, because they've not done the work on their burden on OG. What does the government actively propping up this mean? It likely means regulatory easing, fewer documentation, increased ease of doing business, more subsidies and tax breaks of these companies, prioritize preference in treatment of these companies over other claims. All of these things are the only way you can actively prop up this business. Actively propping it up for these large-scale companies means that you are increasing the chances of A, regulatory capture, and B, lobbying, which means all the things that make insurance companies the worst thing on earth. Every time you try to make claims, you have to fill 100 lines of paperwork, going ahead and getting different kinds of documentation, your claim being denied for active reasons. These large-scale companies having the ability to hire active investigators to make sure you deny your claim. For example, like just quick intuition pump. You're not giving your health insurance because, or your life insurance because you smoke. You died because, hey, you took the wrong medication. All of these means that your claim itself is going to be denied. All of these things now add up and become a part of this industry as well. Uniquely, what that leads to is this industry treating all of its customers with value. And far worse. I'm not saying our world is going to be perfect, their world is going to be far worse. Third, simply put, there exist other laws in all other countries, which means aging population, you are required to have certain benefits like your children, or filial laws where children are required to pay for you, or welfare laws where you're going to go ahead and generate this. I've actually earlier. Increase awareness laws in terms of when you're supposed to go ahead and what are the forms of purchases, when you engage in mutual funds, like mutual funds also exist for things like insurance. Quick argument then, and the only argument I make in this speech. Increasing the ease of doing business and increase of the scale, which is a function of this. Two parts. By increasing or actively propping it up, you are definitely increasing scale, but you are also increasing the ease in which these people do it, which means lesser documentation, lesser restrictions, lesser time scale for people to go ahead and sell off their life insurance, and it becoming more popular as an option, and it is marketed as an option. All of that means is in industry-wide, the people that you are selling it to, on comparison to our world, the buyout is much less. Which means, sure, fewer people engage with this in our world, and that's a good thing, but the fewer people that get it, in those desperate circumstances, get 150,000 or 200,000 instead of this 100,000. because the increased scale of doing this means that there is increased popularity, increased demand for it, and that this industry becomes popular, which means these companies as a strategy can reduce their prices in terms of actually purchasing this and getting it, which is worse off for their target stakeholder, which is the most desperate and the most unkind. Even though that's not the stakeholder of the debate, even for their selected stakeholder, they will worse off.
Yeah, Adithya going as DPM. For pronouns, just POI member. Yeah, sure. Am I, is it better now? Yeah. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Well, first let's understand who are these people that buy into these insurance policies and who does it affect the most, right? It doesn't affect your large populace of these rich people who essentially who have other safety nets like Ojas, right? It's not these people that have mutual funds and like these other plans of investment that they have for safety nets. It's these people. This affects the most marginalized in the middle class, right? It's these people like Jagatreya. It's these people that buy into it essentially when insurance agents come down to your house and essentially push this to you, telling that, oh look, this is something that's very important. This is something that you can buy into essentially to go ahead and save some money for you down the lane. The moment you're essentially going ahead and providing this policy, you're giving them some amount of opt-out from essentially going ahead and getting ripped off from these insurance agents, right? What are these things? Essentially the fact that they go ahead and tell that, oh look, the moment the government goes and props this up, there's this idea that essentially these people get lesser payouts and essentially this becomes such a popular industry, right? Exactly. That is why I think government regulation matters the most. In their world, when there is no active proper, regulation isn't as much, right? When government regulation exists, there's more likely for them to go ahead and have market disruptors, right? The moment essentially they can go ahead and let people have this chance to go ahead and opt into this, right? You would want to create companies that essentially will give people payouts than nothing. That's the delta change, right? They tell me that, oh look, essentially it's nothing but it's better, it's just barely better than the baseline. In their world, essentially these baselines will be much lower because of the fact that there's no market disruptors. Essentially these people are going to go ahead and have these large conglomerates which essentially can go ahead and do whatever they want, right? It will be a libertarian free will idea where in our world we're going ahead and having some amount of government measure in it, right? What else? We are going ahead and what is this whole narrative, right? We are giving this narrative that people can now essentially opt out of this plan, essentially, which is predatory, if not predatory in nature at best case. These are things that they don't have an idea about, right? No one knows when they will die. These are the schemes essentially you want to go ahead and do it because you know we need this money for some point of time right now. A middle class man essentially who needs this money instead of this insurance plan, right? What is the point of this insurance plan to their family if they die 10 years later and this money comes when they don't need it? They need this at this moment right now, right? This is when it matters most to them. They are the most vulnerable right now. This essentially gives them this market. When this government essentially exists, this market provides them this instant opt-in to go ahead and buy out, right? To go ahead and have some money right now which they need to utilize, for example, for their mortgages, paying off debts, or essentially preventing like some serious kind of health or like other issues, right? Like the OOs already said, these insurance agencies and all these are historically bad actors. These people they push these policies to you to purely make money for themselves. That's how they operate. They won't make money if you're benefiting off this, right? This is the only mechanism for you to go ahead and escape from you getting ripped off from them, right? Because you can go ahead and opt out of this only massive conglomeration of these insurance agencies. You can go ahead and have this different market that essentially helps you have opt-in to go ahead and sell and buy whenever this policy requires. It's both beneficial, not just for these middle class and marginalized people, but also for the economy and the government, right? What is the alternative here? It essentially helps the flow of currency in the economy. How does this happen? Yes.
Okay, if you increase regulations, how do you fulfill your burden of actively propping that up? Because that is a disincentive. You can only have one or the other.
Actively propping it up essentially is incentivizing people to go ahead and do it. Increasing regulation doesn't mean that you can't incentivize people to go ahead and do it. It just means you're doing it in a much more safer way. I don't know why you both are two. Back to what I was saying, right? Essentially, it's the fact that you're going ahead and giving these people out of this large conglomeration that exists in this company. Circular flow of economy. The moment in their world, essentially, these insurance agents have this money, right? Essentially, these debt settlements are just money that's just lying in the economy. This is never actually utilized, right? You can't have any actual use of this. What happens in our world? When this market exists, when people go ahead and opt out and start purchasing and selling payments, you're going ahead and adding more cash flow and more income of money into the economy, right? You're essentially creating change of economy. It's not dominantly lying in insurance in this industry of insurance, which is just there. This matters most essentially in this aging population. I'll tell you why. Aging population, sure, they might not all be dependent on government, but most of them are retired. These are people that essentially are too old to work. They are essentially people that have some amount of health liabilities. These are people that essentially have some amount of health issues. These people cannot just go ahead and work all their life. These things are essentially something which is very important to them and their future generations as well, right? This essential opt-out gives them mobility to make sure that their children and that their families are safe and they can have this essential money in this point of time. It's not what they will get 10 years down the line or 20 years down the line. It's what they require right now, right? What does this policy give? It gives people to power in their own particular hands, right? It's the person that now essentially the buyer and the seller essentially are people that need not be from this big conglomeration. These are people that can go ahead and make social mobility changes. These are people that can go ahead and buy out and buy in these policies, right? Yes,
Cool. Essentially, therefore, if you have these companies going ahead and selling, you can have them in our world anyway. Because people have other forms of investment like SWPs, SIPs, a lot of other sources of money.
Yeah. Okay, got it. They keep telling that people have other sources of income. Panel, I'm telling you who this affects the most. Those people have other alternatives to invest and get out of. This affects the most is the marginalized and the people that don't have money to opt into other things, who have already fallen scams, already bought these policies, right? Already people that have bought into these policies which was pushed to them 10, 20 years ago without them having knowledge about these things, right? This is the only way to make use of that policy which they have bought right now. There is no other alternative, right? If they go ahead and just opt out and let it lapse, and if this active government prop-up is not there, they're more likely to have these very bad essentially conglomerates which are going to have very high demand and essentially going to give you the minimum amount of returns and give you bare minimum amount of money for these debt settlements. Instead, in our world, you're going ahead and giving people the option to have fair and regulated by the government, but also not just that, they essentially have this chance of being able to socially mobilize at the time of the most vulnerable points of that time in their life. Essentially, this gives them that amount of dignity which they require at that point of time, because they need to go ahead and help support their family and all of these things, right? Please note, this affects mostly to these people that have already bought it, and essentially they've gone ahead and done this, right? They have no other opt-out, because in their world, you're going ahead, if they're not having this, or essentially you're going ahead and having a very unregulated market where essentially more people going ahead and going to create these bad actors exist, right? This is much worse off in their world. With all these reasons, vote Ojas. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Nair.
Louder, please.
Okay, is this better? Okay, great. So, yeah, let's start on the count of 3, 2, and 1. Okay, so firstly, OG is undermining their own case. They give you hundreds of reasons for why people choose to sell exactly at this point when they are facing trouble to get instant liquidity, because they are facing a lot of problems and they need that instant relief. But understand, like, people in different situations think the same way. They take the same factors into consideration, especially older people who might not have jobs, or like basically they might not have other alternative sources of revenue immediately available to them at that point in time. Which means when faced with any sort of difficult situation, which most people are likely to be faced at some point in time, the easiest way out is to sell your life insurance and to get this instant easy liquidity. So most people are likely to take it, and now the government is also supporting this, which means it is likely to be portrayed as something which is like maybe desirable to do, or which is completely fine to do because there is no risk involved. And now it is what happens is people are most desperate in such situations, and they are going to sell when they are most desperate. And since the government has made it legal, what this means is if companies are exploiting people by just like giving them very low amounts, because that is likely to happen because people are desperate in these situations. At the point of selling your life insurance, you are likely very, very desperate, and companies capitalize on this. These companies want to make profits, and therefore they are likely to basically bargain with these people, play with their emotions, and tell them that okay, we'll give you this money, you'll not get this instant liquidity otherwise, which they might have gotten if they are probably getting or like sought help from other family members, or probably from other investments they had made, which were like probably more fixed in nature or something like that. Which means that people are emotionally coerced into selling off their policies right now by these companies. And now since the government has propped up this industry, this passes all regulatory barriers because it is completely legal to do so. Which means, and since the amount of cases in which this is happening is so high, there is no real like basically capacity for oversight of each and every single case where you can't check whether people are being exploited. Which means on government, it's to exclusively get more exploitation of people, which can be done legally. On our side, the counterfactual is that you have better regulation, because now the amount of cases in which these things happen are simply less, right? If you want to prop up an entire industry, it necessarily comes at the cost of the government giving them concessions, the government probably allowing them some concessions in law, in policy, or in probably in the amount of restrictions they are imposing on them, because this is a capital heavy industry. In order to give these payouts to a large amount of people, need to invest a large amount of capital, and the only reason companies are going to do this is if the government gives them enough incentives, which means probably like giving them opportunities to exploit people by leaving more loopholes. And regulatory taxes is also like happening here, because these are big companies. They have a lot of money. They can lobby governments to make policies that make it easier for them to probably exploit people in such manners, right? But on our side, you have a lesser amount of people, these extremely desperate people who are going to sell their life insurance policies in the first place. They are a very small subset of people. On our side, they can still sell this life insurance, but now the process is going to be more involving more scrutiny, because these cases are less. The government can also maintain stricter rules. They can enforce stricter. They can basically look at this process closer, and it is going to be safer for these people in general. On their side, what happens is they tell you that they are impacting the desperate people, but they are just exploiting them, and they are necessarily forcing everyone to fall into the same trap of selling their assets for real. Now, companies are also likely to collude over here. Like, understanding life insurance companies earn money by not giving life insurances, right? They deny people life insurances by claiming that, okay, you had this disease, or okay, this regulatory keep that we had mentioned in our form in the fine script, which was the 500 types of fine script, which people don't usually or are not usually educated enough to actually understand. They are likely to be caught up in such legal battles and are denied insurances. And that is how life insurance companies actually make profits. Now, on our side, you have a small amount of people who are actually holding on to their life insurance policy and are wanting to claim it. Now, these people are individuals. They have no capacity to fight large legal battles with these large insurance companies, because these people have seasoned lawyers who basically deal with such cases to basically deny them money, right? Which means that such cases are now going to exclusively be won by these people. These people don't have the capacity to actually go ahead and get this life insurance But when you are considering a company which is professionally buying these life insurances from people, they are likely to ensure that okay, all these regulations are being fulfilled properly. They are likely to have their own lawyers to fight with these insurance companies, which means that insurance companies are necessarily going to prioritize giving insurance bailouts to these specialized investors, because it is easier for them to basically win in a legal battle against life insurance companies. Which means that all the insurance payouts that are going to be happening are essentially going to be happening to these companies, and more likely not going to be going to the people who are actually fighting individually, right? Which is just making it difficult for people. Before I move on,
what exploitation will they be actually doing? Give me an example.
Example, you are faced with a financial crisis, and now this option exists with this easy liquidity, which means that even if you have a very big premium, if you require this small amount of money right now, then just give you that small amount of money right now, which is probably 10% of the payout you're likely to get later on, right? And you are going to opt into it because you are in that dire situation, in that crisis. You tell me that people want this liquidity so badly, and hence they are likely to get coerced into this because of all the propaganda also can exist, because now the government is making it legal, which means they are also giving you many narratives to actually force make this practice basically more appealing to people, right? And so basically this is bad because of that reason. Now also people take life insurance simply to provide for their families after their deaths. That's the primary purpose of life insurance in the first place, right? Now people probably still plan for financial problems when they are alive, for their retirement especially. People basically earn in their young age to save for such problems later on, right? People usually do this on both sides of the house. People are smart enough to do that if they are smart enough to take insurance. Almost everyone has savings for such problems. Multiple other alternatives to basically deal with such financial risks later on proactively exist, and people probably opt for them on our side proactively, right? To take this option, now what happens is basically you're taking this option away from life insurance. This is something you're investing in life insurance plus all of these other options, right? To take this option of actually realizing the returns of these life insurance away from these people, because like I told you, in those situations of adversity which most people are likely to face at some point in time, you are forced to sell off your life insurance before you actually get the maximum benefits out of it. Which means the whole purpose of the life insurance system in and of itself is undermined. Life insurance is not meant as an instant liquidity bailout to people. It is meant for people to provide for their families after their death, right? And what is happening here is that basically the people and people are still likely to take insurance early on, because there are offers, there are discounts, basically they need to plan for future, there are a lot of uncertainties. People continue paying premiums since a large amount of time when they are young, and at the point when they are actually close to getting the returns of this policy, then they are probably just like 10 years away from getting the returns of this policy. That is when they are forced to sell off, and that is why
that is why the returns they get are basically extremely bad, because in that particular situation, even if they probably have a sell off some other assets they have like property or something, the bailout, the insurance they are likely to receive 10 years later down the line is going to offset this financial setback they take by a very large margin, because that is going to provide for their families later on. Hence, basically, they are using the wrong system to solve the wrong problem. Basically, you are just forcing most people into opting for this instead of the people who actually need it, just to have access to it or not.
Perfect. Thank you, dear. With this, we come to the end of
Volume, okay. Beginning in 3, 2, 1. Go. Panel, listen carefully what opening opposition just said. These people are intelligent, that they can plan insurances, they have savings, they have all sorts of backup options for when a disaster hits. And what they're saying is, if a disaster is so bad, like if you entered into a disabled sort of accident where you're not able to do anything anymore, or a disaster where you've gotten cancer, or any kind of other disaster, so your home got destroyed in a sort of a storm or in an earthquake. In these kind of disasters, they're saying it's so bad that somebody will take your life insurance policy from you, which actually isn't helping you. It's actually taking money from you in this desperate time, and instead is giving you a lump sum of money so you can get out of this desperate situation in the first place. Panel, this is an amazing thing. I need this high amount of liquidity at this point in time because my situation is so desperate. I am aware that they'll give me a huge amount of money much later. I'm okay to forego it because my current circumstances are that much difficult. If that is the comparative, we are fine by taking the trade-off, and we're fine saying that we can win because these people who will choose to sell their insurances are only those people who absolutely have to in this sense. The case from side of closing government is why the increased availability of instant capital is so important, and because this is different from opening government, because opening government relies on the principles of Ojas choice or dignity. We will explain why you have more options to choose from right now, why the economy is only getting worse, and therefore the current access to capital is important. The first thing I want to talk about is the nature of this debate in terms of aging economies and the people we are talking about. What kind of people are we talking about? The kind of people who are old or don't have enough savings, that is when they die, there's not enough money left for their dependents to use them. That is their children, that is their daughters, that is maybe their wife who isn't working. These people don't have enough money in the bank account if this person dies to be able to take care of the rest of their life. And these are the people whose lives are changed on either side. This debate is not about the old person. This debate is about the dependent of the old person and whether they want the money when their uncle dies or they want the money now because they have some sort of better use for it. Now, notice that economy itself, aging economies are struggling a lot. Why? Because of existing low circulation of money overall in the economy. Why? Because old people, who is the majority of the economy, are generally feel like saving since they aren't earning income at that point in time, and therefore they have a very risk-averse attitude and they don't spend as much at all. But also notice old people are generally compelled to already pay for lots of random things like premiums on a variety of insurances like life, healthcare, car, house, whatever. But also younger people who are earning right now are stretched thin, supporting the larger volume of old people in the economy, and the younger gen themselves aren't having a lot of children to be the replacement, which means ultimately it's a huge drag on the economy, which has two implications. One, a lower amount of business on net chakras in the economy, which will only keep slowing down as the amount of transactions in the economy reduce as more people save and more people get old. But on top of that, this means there's less jobs going into the future and less opportunities, but also the financial system itself is stretched as banks don't have good people to give money to, or necessarily the government is stretched thin giving welfare of various kinds of things to various kinds of people because the economy is not able to fulfill its job of providing for the people. The government then has to do that instead. Now, where does this bring me? It brings me to then proving you why dependents having early access to capital by selling these life insurance policies is the most important thing. Notice A, this money can buy more things right now in an economy which is slowing down and will continue to slow down going into the future. Because right now, there are more number of jobs available than there will be in the future. Be better returns of me doing expensive things like moving to the city for better opportunities, or getting a private education, or learning a trade skill. I have more returns of me doing it right now and spending this money right now to earn these skills, as opposed to in the future when this money buys much less and the people using my skills to give me money for those jobs are much less in the future. But on top of that, notice the kind of costs will only increase going to the future because this is a welfare-based economy, which you all agree in this debate, which means the government pumps some economy with lots of money to use hands out and things like that, which is really bad because the more money people have, the more costs of general things increase, because that means suppliers can demand more money because they see the people people who are demanding these items have more money to give them. And if costs keep increasing, we call this inflation. If inflation increases, the 100 rupees worth now is more valuable than the 150 rupees worth later, because inflation has made the cost of 100 rupees equivalent to the 200 going into the future, into the far future, later. But now notice, because the inflation makes this money less valuable going into the future, that means your money will have most value right now. Therefore, spending or using the money for some good outcome investment right now is the best way to maximize its value going into the future. Then, you know, this B, inherently as people age, you just inherently lose opportunities. This isn't even about money, it's about your options to do things. You get locked out of certain jobs because you're too old, you're above the age of 30, above the age of 35. You get locked out of loans because banks think you're too old to get these kinds of loans, like education loans or other kinds of loans. You get locked out of educational opportunities that you might have originally been able to get if you had the money at the age of 20, as opposed to having money at the age of 30 instead, when these universities say you're too old to join a cohort instead. Which basically means your ability to use money itself then is increased much more right now as opposed to the future in a dying economy. But finally, we think people know when to sell their insurances, and this engages directly with opening opposition. How? Because notice, one, these life insurance policies have a great psychological value to it. People are going to sign life insurance company. They look death in the eye and they say, even when I'm gone, I will be protected, my family will be protected. It takes a huge amount of humility and sense of self sort of vulnerability to go and do this kind of thing. It's a great sacrifice on your mental pride and well-being, which is why you treat it with a high amount of sacredness and a high amount of respect, which means you're more sort of accountable to people who are trying to take this from you for free or for some nonsense of underpaying or things like that. You will question them because it's meaningful to you. But B, notice life insurance generally have a high amount of payout quickly.
Dependents don't get the money, the policyholder gets the money. Investment firms that are going to get the money in terms of the global economy, instead of buying these derivatives, invest elsewhere. Why is this system?
The policyholder is dead. How is he getting the money? It's obviously going to his next of kin. That's the point of the life insurance policy. Anyways, back to business. Now, notice then that these people, that life insurances have a huge payout when you die. Notice this is because obviously the length of life insurance is longer, the number of premiums you're paying is longer, and all those things. What this means for this debate is that you know that the amount of money is supposed to get is really high, maybe 10, 15, 20 years in the future. So you know, okay, if I'm abandoning this huge sum later, at least let me get something reasonable right now. You're much less willing to compromise for something much lower. But finally, we think with over time, as the free market develops, as the government sort of, sure, we take the trade-off that they let more of these companies exist, that's fine. These companies have to compete, they advertise, they sell, and they sort of act over long term. They will balance out according to supply and demand to a way of regulation, to a way of cost, which is amenable to the people for, in general, for everyone to be able to do business, otherwise nobody's making any profit at all. Notice this is the same thing that happens with regular insurances right now. There are some scamsters, there are some evil people, but overall the insurance industry is a net good on humanity. Otherwise, offense is to defend banning insurances as a whole because some bad companies exist in the world of God. But for those reasons, vote for side, closing government.
Perfect. I thank Anjit for
The global poor are always neck deep in the struggles of poverty. Proposition causes a flood that drowns them immediately. First, I want to position our extension against opening opposition because there are a bunch of flaws in their case. First, their case is relying on a worst case assumption of the way that insurance companies act right now. They never prove why no amount of regulation has been able to succeed right now. I would note that particularly in developed countries where there are aging population, the voter incentive or the voter push that has come from the public for government to regulate these options has been massive. This has been going on for the past 50 years, which means the extent of things that the insurance can get away right now with is extremely marginal. There are many alternatives that the government also supports and subsidizes. So many different alternatives that aren't as profit-driven as private insurance companies still exist. But secondly, I have a crucial, there's a tension in their case. The first idea is that if these are individuals that have large amounts of savings, why is there a desperation and a need to sell this in the first place? They mischaracterize the individuals that need to sell it. But lastly, there is a deadlock on top half. If it is true that these people are desperate and closing government is also correct, that they need this money, it's unclear how opening opposition ever fights back. They just say, oh, it's bad because you sell it, but that's what the motion is about. They never impact this out, and this is exactly where closing opposition is going to come out. First, I will respond, and this will be a rebuttal extension to gov benches, about why the amount of money that you get right now is not going to be valuable for you and is going to run out quickly. The first reason that you can't use this money well is because, of course, in developed nations, the amount or the cost of living is just extremely massive, particularly for older individuals that have the amount of maturity that can get some levels of profit out of this when you sell it. These are individuals that are quite old, so you need to get more medicines, and pharmaceutical lobbies are extremely expensive in these places. But secondly, you need to go for regular medical checkups, and these are recurring costs that you have to face. But thirdly, rent is extremely massive, so exactly in the places that opening opposition characterizes about Tokyo and the Nordic countries, the housing market is in a collapse because rent prices are out of control, so you have to constantly pay for these things out of pocket. But thirdly, there are social pressures and dependence, so even if you can get this money right now, tuition for like your grandchildren or your children, things like buying a car and buying anything that you can use insubstantially with this money is just super expensive. So if the characterization is correct that you're able to get some marginal sum, I would just note that this money runs out quite quickly on their side, and this money is not going to be useful for these individuals, particularly because of the cost of living pressure that these people are faced with. But secondly, why are you actually able to pay these things and continue? Because this is like what the opening opposition never proves. They're vulnerable to the responses on desperation or why these people can't continue. The first reason is because, of course, these costs are low. Note the framing that we give you about the way that these lobbies have been cracked down upon by developed countries. I think these are institutions that have already been forced to have more clearer terms and to have lesser maturity and things like that. So you're required to pay like nominal sums, like maybe $10 a month, and you're doing this over a long period of time, which means that this scales. So because you started taking life insurance when you were 25 and now you are like 65, that is 40 years of recurring payments, investments that the insurance company has made on your behalf, and this means that the nominal cost that you end up getting at the end of it and the premiums that you have to pay continue to be marginal. But secondly, if you are actually that desperate, we think that other options already exist where you don't need to sell this insurance. So banks often create options and opportunities where you can leverage the life insurance that you have now and be able to get some level of money out of this. This does not take away your life insurance, this just gives you access to the same liquidity that they want, and you can pay this back like you pay back a mortgage and things like that. All of this proves why the status quo is actually possible, why individuals can survive, why they're often not that desperate, and why the money they get on their side is often not useful. The second extension coming from our side is why this forces people into bad financial decisions, often due to social pressures. I would note the mechanisms coming from opening opposition are again reliant on insurance companies. Insurance companies are going to come to your houses and make you sell these things. That is often just not how things happen. We're going to give more realistic ideas and realistic measures of how this happens, and we're going to posit that this happens primarily due to social pressures that force you into selling this life insurance policy. First, who are the individuals that actually want to sell this, and this is different from opening opposition because they live in a utopic world. I would note that these are individuals that already have low economic ladder and they've been able to climb up relatively less. So these are people that don't have a large amount of education, and these are also people that don't have huge job opportunities. This usually looks like factory workers in Ireland, for example, that have been working and slaving off for many years, and they often live with their families, so they live within communities or they live with their nuclear families because these other individuals also don't have enough advantages, there aren't enough social mobility metrics, so your families often end up staying with you. What does this policy uniquely do for these individuals? First, it is the government validating this choice that this is the good choice that you ought to be making, which means that people already have a bias which lends them to believe that this is a good thing that they should be forced to do. But secondly, it's not insurance companies that come over here and force you because there are laws about how much coercion you can do, the amount of interaction that you have with these corporations is lesser. Of course, the individuals that are going to come to you with offers are going to be the investors. So yes, opening opposition is correct that these people have a lot of money. These are the individuals that constantly harass you and keep showing you options and opportunities about how much you can be paid off for these things. It also looks like banks getting involved. So every time you want to go to a bank and extend your life insurance or things like that, these are options that are presented to you and they become far more proximate. But thirdly, and I would know this is crucial and different, the social pressures and the social narratives this creates are massive. Because when you are the son of a 60-year-old and you see that your child is eating stale bread, that they have to go to a shitty state institution, that my child's future is being sacrificed because my father won't give up this life insurance, those are the points at which you end up creating greater amounts of animosity. Those are the points at which you end up forcing these individuals into changes. Because when you have access to immediate liquidity that you otherwise would not have gotten had this choice not existed, this becomes far more important for people to get into. Before I move on, opening up. Closing. Lovely. What does this do then, crucially? First, families react in extremely adverse manners towards individuals that have this life insurance. You increase the amount of resentment that you have. You keep harassing these individuals, telling them that it is your fault and you are the person that is putting our family through misery. I think these are the sorts of narratives that often force these individuals into making this choice. But secondly, even if you aren't directly forced and your family doesn't do enough, your family ends up treating you in worse ways, so they show more microaggressions, they fight with you more frequently, they send you to shitty old age houses because they they don't want to live with you because they continue to blame you for all of the problems. Why is this uniquely harmful for individuals? The first is because while agency and choice might exist on both reserve benches, this is a forced and a coerced choice. These people are incapable of making rational decisions because when the comparative is my family will probably like me more when I get this money, or whether they're going to continue to hate me for money that I'm not even going to get right now. Those are the points at which people are forced to change and they end up making worse decisions. Therefore, this choice should not exist and the government should not lock this up. But secondly, we just think this harms individuals' dignity. You don't have a right to life, and these people are constantly pressuring you and telling you to die and things like that. And these sorts of narratives just break up our families and break about the only trust and the only social metric or support structure that you have. But lastly then, we just think this is bad because it often lowers the barrier, so more and more younger individuals who are in their 40s and things like that end up getting forced into this, so that future safety net also ends up going away. For all of these reasons, give it to closing opposition.
Perfect. Thank you, Anoop. All good. Yeah, ready.
1 second. Okay, volume beginning in 3, 2, 1, go. Panel, the most damaging response coming from all of our bench is 2 minutes inside Shaurya's speech when he says, listen, by the way, maybe you can get this liquidity from other sources like a bank. His issue though is he has not explained to level of depth why banks are a better source of money compared to the life insurance policies, which he should do in his whip speech. I tell him now as his trainer. First, notice banks will not give you a lot of money unless you have a lot of collateral. Note in the comparative, life insurance policy selling does not need collateral, which means on the delta, we don't have to put our house for a bet. We don't have to put our cars for a bet. We don't have to bet things which are so important to us and our sustenance, which means in safety, selling a life insurance policy is better than getting a bank loan if it gives you a loan, by the way, because the bank won't give you a loan. Why? Because the lower number of heirs you have because of the aging economy, because you and your wife have to be taking care of one kid who only has like maybe no kids at all, implies going into the future, if you deposit a loan, it's much more difficult for your heirs to repay this loan because less people are contributing to it, which means banks generally are averse to giving you money in the first place. But on top of that, it's a flowing economy, which implies banks are more directed towards investing and giving loans to businesses that generally take on larger loans for higher interest rates, because that's the only meaningful way banks can generate high amounts of money in this kind of flowing economy where nobody's buying shit, which ultimately means that you will not get the loan because you're not a priority customer for this bank who has no collateral in that sense. But finally, even if all this is not true, think about sheer volume. There are those situations where you have to get a lot of money. In those situations, will a bank give you a fuck ton of money, or will selling your life insurance policy for which your debt itself is on the contract itself give you more money? Deposit is the life insurance contract should give you more money because those things are compounded over large amounts of time. As Shaurya himself says, 40-60 years, which means the value right now will be pretty high, even if it expires much later, which ultimately means you will just directly get an easier, higher source of money for you. Notice, in all situations, we don't have to sell life insurance. All we have to do is to say, even in 2 out of 25 situations, if my situation is so bad, just the option and legality and the encouragement of this industry is so good that I have the option to sell life insurance in a safe way, then that's ultimately good for me, and that's all you have to say. You don't have to say all the time you're selling the life insurance, we just say at the moment you exercise the choice meaningfully impacts life is important. We think on their side they're limited to banks in all 25 situations, which will not cover all 25 as I explained. But next, well, what about government welfare? Notice governments have already said are stretched thin because the economy has lots of dependents and less people to take taxes from to pay for these dependents. On top of that, they have various types of welfare to do, which implies they just have less money for you overall. But finally, the last goal or thing you can do is to sell your assets. Things like your gold, things like your land, your vehicle, your house, whatever. And these will leave people extremely economically susceptible to any kind of shock. One car accident, one health emergency, one kind of bad money lending scheme. Anything happens, then these people will start going into debt and into cycles of poverty as these debt accumulates and as the situation gets worse and worse, as the credit score drops and the access to credit reduces. These people will suffer immensely in those situations. We protect these people by giving them a better amount of access to this economy of selling your life insurance policies. In the absence of government actually supporting this, notice what happens is this industry has less legitimacy because the government is not supporting it. It just sounds like a scam. Oh, somebody wants to buy my life insurance policy. What the hell? This is something really important and culturally something which has been going on since my great grandfather. Well, who would in the right mind sells a life insurance policy? The unique shift of perspective that happens is when the government is going to say it's legal and government say it's valuable. The government themselves raises awareness and raises regulations and raises campaigns for it. You believe it's a more legitimate idea, which means the number of people on Delta who opt into it in times of need increases only on our side when the government opts into encouraging this in the first place. Unique analysis Ojas doesn't give. Now I'll go house by house quickly because none of the houses have anything much to say. Opening government says that these people can use the money now, which is good, which is the same case of me, which is amazing. But the problem is they don't explain why choice is good on their side. That is, they don't explain first of all why there is more choice having money right now as opposed to less choice having money in the future. They just said, oh, I will have money right now, which is good, but you have money later too, which is also good. So then why is having money right now more good is a real question which separates CG and OG. And I give you in my member speech why having money right now is so essential, so good as opposed to OG not doing that, which is why essentially they fall out of this debate. But also they don't exactly prove or hinge the case on the delta of time. They just say, oh, money now is good because money can be used to buy healthcare and things, but they don't explain why the costs of the economy are increasing slowly. They don't explain why the jobs are reducing, why business is going down, and therefore we only get the delta importance of time coming from closing government, and therefore we should weigh closing government over opening government because we complete the contribution and extend it to a significant degree. Now the case from opening opposition is that there are huge demonic companies that essentially come in and buy huge amounts of life insurance policies for everybody and become Satan. Now listen, there are only two ways they can exploit in this debate. One, they can say they can devalue the price, because if you're owed 200 for selling the policy right now, instead they say I'll give you 150 only. This doesn't necessarily happen most of the time because of regulation, which Shaurya himself agrees with. But also on top of that, we think that because of the free market, because many people are selling, different insurance companies would want that person's insurance policy before the others, which means they will all sort of coalesce to a reasonable price, which is a market balance, which is why we think that this price expectation will reduce going into the future, and into the future the laws itself will become more robust and more specific for all these situations.
Cool. People are not a monolith. Obviously, we're not talking about savvy people. The desperate few are few in number, very few. But in your world, more people, less desperate circumstances, and less payout. We still get those 2 out of 25 who can sell their policy. Well, how do you protect the extra 5 or 6 who are getting 250 instead of 500 bucks?
The extra 5 or 6 currently their dependents can't buy a private education. They don't have the skills for a job. They don't have the ability to move to city centers which have better job opportunities. Their time value of money is reducing going into the future. All of this implies that you're protecting those 6 out of 25 because you're giving them more valuable opportunities right now which can protect them going into the future, like making them more independent or giving them other sources of income which are more reliable in the first place. Now finally, the second kind of weird thing on their side is choice scams, which we already discussed in this debate. Choice scams don't work when people have a high amount of emotional attachment to these kinds of contracts and necessarily have a lot of accountability for them. Finally, discussing closing opposition, I think the main case is that you have a lot of narratives on families' pressure to sell a policy because people want your money. Notice this is wholly non-engaging to the fact that these people are intelligent to first of all plan to have a policy in the first place, which means they understand the concept of paying premiums to get more money later. It's something they understand, which means a random policy is equal to break up a family, or like a random narrative is not going to do that. Is a weird impact. On top of that, necessarily they say that family hates paying premiums, but then that goes against the idea that they necessarily understand the logic of I'll pay for something now, but it gives me returns later. I pay rent now, I get a house. I will pay for low interest, but it gives me money. They understand these things. They don't see why they're stupid. For those reasons, vote for side closing government.
Perfect. And that is the point.
If this tournament was never happening, I would have never come to Bangalore. It's only when the opportunity exists that you're able to change the way that people perceive these things, you're able to change the way people act, and that is when all the harms of love end up unlocking. We're going to do a couple of things in this page. First, why your families end up living better lives and why they're likely to wait for those opportunities insofar as this choice does not exist. A couple of reasons. First, the biggest or the most important and undefeatable thing in this debate is the info slide. If the info slide tells you that this money is going to be significantly smaller or at least marginal than the money that you would have gotten later on, we can assume that the payoff that you're going to get when these individuals die is massive. And this is crucial because when this individual dies, you're able to get more money and you can invest this in better ways. This means that children are better schools, they're able to get better connections, they're able to learn under better quality of life. But secondly, it means that you yourself are able to take more risks and have more abilities, so you can fund your further education, you can move to a city and try and hope for a better job and things like that. But thirdly, you just have more capital to be able to make investments. So now when you have this money that is greater, that comes after the death of your father or your mother, at that point you can invest more into SIPs, you can invest into the stock market, you can buy government bonds, and all of these are better because the large sum of money that you had now can compound over time, and that leads to more future trickle down benefits. But third, even in the short term, you're just able to increase the quality of life, so you can get better food, you can get better, like I don't know, television and things like that, which means that the amount of engagement that you have with your family itself ends up increasing. Why is this money better than they get on their side? The first, of course, is just like it's more, but secondly, there are fewer people in the family that you need to support. Oftentimes, it is the individuals that end up dying who require the greatest sum of money and attention from these families. When this person is no longer there, you're just able to make sure that this money lasts for longer. But secondly, this is money that comes after their death. These are points where you are more vulnerable to making bad decisions, or you're just more vulnerable to like getting depressed and things like that. At that point, when you get greater sums of money, you'll be able to get more consolation. You feel that your parent has looked after you, and yes, we would have lived a shitty life, but at least there was better decision making that these individuals made for our better future. And what this lastly means is that people who end up dying end up leaving better legacies behind because they remembered more fondly than they would have on their side. I want to note on Gov, resentment is massive, and even if the resentment and microaggression isn't more, and even if these victim narratives don't play off as much, people themselves feel really shitty that they are depriving their families of the qualities of life that they could have had. These individuals, even if social pressures don't exist, feel that they are responsible for their suffering and therefore end up making worse decision making. On our side, don't give them this choice. Allow them to have the dignity to choose that their life is important, that their life is going to be better off, and to leave behind greater sums of money when their family actually needs it and is more vulnerable to it. But second, it leads to more conflicts within families, and this is particularly harmful for the insurance person in the first place, because if you can get kicked out, if you're going to be cut off from your family's funds, and these are all instances that can happen because your families end up blaming you, these individuals end up being far more vulnerable, they end up being far more dependent on the government, and this flips all of the benefits that they're trying to get. The first thing I want to do then is beat out closing government, because a lot of their ideas are false or self-defeating. The first is that these people or like the amount of sellers in the economy, because all of their impacts are reliant on everyone selling this. The first issue is that this is contradictory to opening government's claim. Opening government already sets out that there are fewer individuals that end up selling these things. But secondly, even if it means that there are more individuals that sell this, first, that means that more people on scale are vulnerable to harms that come from closing opposition. So more people end up losing that choice, end up losing their dignity, and end up fracturing from their communities. But secondly, if it is true that more people are selling this and there is more money circulating in the economy, that literally increases inflation, because now everyone can buy more things, so the amount of things that people are willing to sell for also increases. So that flips the harm coming from closing government, and I would note that it often ends up being self-defeating, because it means that any of the benefits they want to unlock on businesses and things like that don't work. But thirdly, even if you buy opening government and closing government, that the economy or government burdens are something to take care of, we simply don't weigh utilitarian metrics over choice. I might really like having sex with Archit, but if Archit does not consent to it, if he does not choose to do it, then we don't calculate that utility. We always value their choice and their rights and things like that. At that point, when we're able to prove that people themselves are deprived of this choice, even if utilitarian metrics are unlocked, they ought not to be cared about, because it comes at the hands of particular individuals that the state has a responsibility to look after, individuals that end up being far more vulnerable due to the mechanisms that end up setting out. The second thing I want to do is beat out opening opposition and clearly differentiate our impacts a lot more. The first thing that I want to note is that their case ends up being reliant on lobbying power. It's uncertain the extent to which these places end up having that amount of struggle. The mechanism that I give you in my member speech already prove why these lobbies that end up massive and massively cracked down upon, but there's also, because these are developed institutions, more amount of competition that exists, so these premiums can fall down and are often not as bad as opening government would claim, or as opening opposition would claim. But secondly, we have a different method to prove that investor capture ends up happening. So lobbying power, even if they are correct, already exists and they're already able to perpetuate these funds. The only way that you unlock the extent of impact that makes these things worse is when investors end up getting involved. And this is crucially bad for multiple reasons. Because now insurance companies have incentives to make their policies cater to fail so that investors can buy this later on. And this is extremely profitable for these corporations. Because if you are going to die at 75 and you sell this to someone who is 25 right now, those are more payments and more premiums that these individuals and these insurance companies can end up unlocking. So it is in their incentive now, because of this investor capture, to make these premiums a lot harder, to include more clauses like the amount of healthcare or the amount of like heart attack protection that you're able to get lapsing when you're 45 instead of 60, which is what it ideally should have been. And these clauses only unlocked because of investors, not because of the lobbying power, and therefore we're able to be far more convincing mechanisms for why the industry ends up failing. Opening up.
Closing. Your case about investor capture does not work because your examples are entirely reliant on health insurance. That's how health insurance works, not life insurance.
No, so it's literally in the motion. It's like people who are buying this from life insurance people. So it doesn't matter where health insurance is involved. Because even if it's true that these clauses end up decreasing, the amount of money that you can probably give in the future with the policy also ends up decreasing, which means that at all points it is these individuals that want to opt into insurance and end up losing out. So maybe it's true, you don't get you don't get healthcare protection and stuff like that, but you still lose out on the extent of like money that you're able to get in the end, and they're able to increase the risk factor and make it far more unlikely for you to be able to do. The last thing I want to do then is just wait. Also, like last thing, a lot of the mechanisms about legal battles are quite irrelevant in this debate. You're choosing to do this, or you're being coerced into this. In either side, you're not really opting into legal systems in the first place. But they crucially never resolve the deadlock about why this money is going to be insufficient. So all of our material coming at members about why this money is often quite easily spent by the families, why the families don't have the ability to make good decisions, and why the cost of living is so massive, is crucial in resolving the top-half deadlock, and therefore should win us at least over opening opposition. The reason that opening government loses this debate is multifold. The first is because they're entirely reliant on people having medical insurance, but also on somehow being like reliant on welfare. We think that this is an extremely marginal subset, and even if you are able to increase the amount of money or like increase the efficiency of government, we also think that there are better ways in which these things can be unlocked. It's uncertain why these individuals have to be the ones that end up getting sacrificed for the government welfare systems to end up getting more efficient. For all of these reasons, given that we protect individuals from the worst instances and we preserve their choice and dignity, we will.
Okay, thank you. Just keep on the line of the staff. I ask them to first proceed and you very